governor has given no clear direction on what he wants this commission to do with respect to how they're going to go out to the public, what they're going to ask, what they're going to show, or what is even going to be resolved by this commission. In fact, there was one very simple question that was asked by Mayor Morris at the very end. What is the purpose of this commission? What are we trying to do? And United States Senator Angela Also Brooks was not able to answer that simple question. And that's where we are right now. We have decided amongst a number of things that we need to be able to speak to Marylanders. We need to be able to talk to Marylanders from the perspective that we are seeing what's going on in this mid-cycle redistricting. It is a highly partisan act that the governor has taken forward. And we are going to provide something in case there's a special session. We're going to have a bill to introduce that will address what we would call fair maps, and we'll be able to define fair maps, unlike the governor being able to define that. We're going to be able to put a commission together that will address this issue. We've also seen a lot in the last few days about the budget. As you know, the Spending Affordability Committee met yesterday and talked about a new $1.4 billion deficit that the state of Maryland will face. Again, it is after Governor Moore enacted the largest tax increase in the history of Maryland at $1.6 billion. We are still going to be another $1.4 billion short when we go into the legislative session in January. Projections that will go even deeper than that with respect to getting into the blueprint, finally getting implemented. Deficits will look to be in the 2.8, 2.9, 3.4, $3.5 billion in the next 4 or 5 years. So again, we've addressed some issues with that. We'll continue to talk about where we think the state of Maryland needs to be. Quite simply, that they are overspending, not bringing in enough revenue. We think that the problem is overspending, and we think that there are a number of cuts that can be made that we will talk about in the budget. But more specifically, to address redistricting, Minority Leader Jason Buckle is going to talk about the bill that we have that would be introduced, again, if we have a special session or in the beginning of next session. Delegates Pipke and Senator Reedy will give some further comment to that, and then we'll be open for questions once that is done. So, Delegate Buckle.
Thank you, Steve. The governor's plan for redistricting is not about fairness. He talks a lot, and other Annapolis Democrats talk a lot about we have to assess, we have to determine whether or not we have fair districts. There's no earthly reason that there's some difference between what they viewed as fair in 2021 versus 2025. Fair, that's not what fair means. It's not about fairness, it's about politics. And the decision to undertake extreme partisan gerrymandering will have serious consequences for our state. Unfortunately, Maryland is already known as one of the most gerrymandered states in America. And Annapolis Democrats, they like it that way. And they have consistently refused to reform our redistricting process for years. There have been numerous attempts, commissions, bills, to attempt to sort of put some teeth to the redistricting process, make it a more fair, a more bipartisan, and a more transparent process. Because right now, it just benefits the party in power. It completely ignores unaffiliated voters, and it allows Democratic Party politicians to pick their voters to get results that have nothing to do with fair, free, and open democratic elections, democratic small d. We believe that there's a more fair and principled way to do this than what the governor is proposing, and that's why we'll intend to be offering, again, either at a special session or in the beginning of the 2026 session, the Fair Districts for Maryland Act. What will the act do? I think it can be summarized best in 3 principal parts. First thing it will do is it will put into statute and affirm once and for all that the redistricting process is a once-a-decade process. So after the United States Census is promulgated, there will be a redistricting commission. Those will be the maps that get adopted as a result of that commission. They will last until the next United States Census. There won't be this every 2 years, every 4 years, every 5 years, depending upon how the political winds blow, ability to go in and sort of mess with the maps and change people's expectations. Secondly, the commission will be bipartisan. Governor Hogan had a redistricting commission bill back in 2020 and 2021, and It was a little complicated. It involved essentially the State Ethics Commission almost sort of randomly selecting people from lists of folks who signed up. And while I think that there's really some value to that, we also want to be pragmatic and reasonable and look at the way most of America does this. A lot of states that do this in a more bipartisan way, they have a bipartisan commission, as ours would be, comprised of designees from the governor's office. So the governor will still have a large role, in some senses a primary role in the process. But the governor will have to pick at least one person who is a registered independent, who is outside of the political process, who is not someone who is connected to the existing Annapolis or federal power brokers to be part of this commission. The Speaker and the Senate President will have designees, but the minority party will have designees as well. And the voting strength of the system will be set up so that no one party can run roughshod over the other. As you all know, 2 of our last 3 governors have been Republicans, Governor Ehrlich, Governor Hogan. So who knows how this will play out in the future with respect to a governor's ability to place his or her designees on the commission. What our bill will do is it doesn't really matter who's in power holding the governor's office. There will have to be bipartisan agreement between the parties and with independent input in order to put a map forward. Perhaps most importantly, what the bill will do is it will enshrine standards that courts have said, that Judge Battaglia said in the 2021 litigation, should apply to congressional districts, such as that they have to be contiguous, they have to be compact, they have to reflect communities of common interest, natural boundaries, and they can't be based on simply looking at political registration of voters who live in the districts or past voting patterns. That's what redistricting is in America now. It's not done by the politicians. It's done by computer consultants who run computer programs to pick through various precincts and determine this is what the registration statistics are. Let's stretch all of these lines together in some absurd crayon drawing and turn it into a district that only Democrats can win or only Republicans can win, regardless of whether that district reflects actual contiguous communities or people who view themselves as part of a similar region. Our bill will eliminate that once and for all, and it would return us to fair districts in a bipartisan process and eliminate some of the heightened, angry politicization of the congressional redistricting process. And with that, I'd like to turn it over for Delegate Pippi, who has some interesting thoughts, I believe, about what Maryland really looks like and why the governor's proposal, essentially that would make it an 8-0 state, is completely unfair.
Thank you, Delegate Buckle. I mean, look, we're not Texas. We're not Indiana. We're not California. We're not Ohio. We're not Virginia. This is Maryland. And the fact of the matter is, Democrats in Maryland have gerrymandered this state to a pulp. There's no juice left. For example, 20 years ago, there were 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats in the House federal delegation. 10 years later, after the 2000 census, they drew it down to 6 and 2. 10 years after that, they drew it down to 7 and 1. 10 years later, which was a couple years ago, they attempted to draw District 1 across the Bay Bridge to eliminate the only Republican voice in our federal delegation, in a state where 40% of Marylanders roughly vote for Republican candidates. Think about that. 40% of Marylanders roughly vote for Republicans. That's why 2 of the last 4 governors have been Republican. So the idea that the governor would even entertain the idea of disenfranchising millions of Marylanders because of national political pressure, it's outrageous. You know, for a governor that wants to leave no one behind, the fact that he would leave millions of Marylanders behind on this issue is outrageous. So what we're proposing is a very reasonable, independent process to ensure that voters have a say. And I think everyone knows it. It's disappointing, to say at least, that the governor is even going down this route. And we know exactly why he's doing it. We think it's wrong. And that's why we're putting forth a plan to address this. And I think that is the right way. I think to be a leader, you need to lead. I think the governor is not leading on this issue. Instead of what's doing best for Marylanders, he's doing what's best for his party. That may help him in a primary, but that doesn't help Marylanders who are focused on high cost of living, high cost of energy, Inflation, it was just mentioned that yesterday, we now are looking at another $1.4 billion hole that Marylanders are going to have to fill. That's what we should be focusing on, not eliminating voices in our state. So with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Senator Justin Reedy, for the final thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Pippy. And just to put another fine point on this, when we talk about the issue of fairness, only in Maryland could the party that has 57% of the voter registration and owns 88% of the congressional seats say that it's fair to take away the 12% for fairness. It's insanity, in my view, considering how dependent we are on the federal government. As we've just watched in this shutdown, a shutdown that Governor Moore actively aided and abetted by trying to give aid and comfort to our 2 U.S. senators who voted repeatedly to keep the government closed for no reason. Because as you can see, we've reopened it. We could have reopened it. It could have never been closed. It's insanity to say we should not have any Republicans in our federal delegation at all. You know, if we were up here and it was 5-3, it'd be a lot harder to argue. We got one Republican in a state that, as we've heard, on average, is about 40% of Republicans, 40% of the top voters vote for the Republican statewide, generally speaking, give or take a couple percentage points. So it's just the height of absurdity to say that it would be fair to do that. And let's take a moment now, too, because I think it's important to understand where we are in the country. The mid-cycle redistricting, we hear, of course, that Texas started it all, and now these other states are moving. Let's be very clear. We've actually, in the news, just in the last couple of days, there's at least, I believe, three red states that have said, either over time or just recently, said we're not moving forward, or we're very unlikely to move forward with doing an 8-0 or a 4-0. Utah, which has a court order, but they could defy that court order and try to redraw their maps. Utah said, we're not going to do that. We're going to keep one Democrat district. Utah could very easily draw 4 districts that are Republican, and they're keeping one Democratic district. Kansas has said, we're not doing it. They're not going to, they have a swing district out of their, I think it's 3 districts. And Indiana, there's been pressure on Indiana, but it looks like Indiana's not going to do an 8-0 map either. So there's actually cover here to kind of de-escalate this tension. And I think that's why we're offering this bill as a good faith effort to say, why don't we try to join in the national movement to really say, hey, let's cool down the temperature. This is an opportunity to still end up with a map. If we pass this bill and this was our redistricting plan, it would still end up with a map that was mostly Democrats in the state as far as congressional seats, but it would be much more fair process. And so that's what we're putting forth, a good faith effort to say, let's try to get some more clarity around this. But I just think it's so important to say this is not a situation where a state has many seats that are the minority party. There is one Republican out of 10 federal officials we have, 2 U.S. senators, 8 congressmen. One Republican. And we are saying, for a state heavily dependent, as we can tell by the budget deficit the governor has not breathed a word about, we can tell that we are heavily dependent on federal government involvement in our state. Why would we, when the national government goes back and forth like a pendulum, why would you not want to have any Republican voice on Capitol Hill? That's crazy. So it's not even just about, it's not fair, it's also just not smart. So that's why we're trying to put forth a good faith attempt to say, let's try to redress redistricting long term. But we also are here to say it's absolutely the wrong thing to try to squelch the small amount of voice for a minority party in this state. And so with that, we'll be happy to take any questions.
A question about one of the, without having read the bill, one of the components of the proposal, which is this codification of language that would ban mid-cycle redistricting. Does that mean, can one infer from that Republicans don't believe that there's a legal question about whether or not Maryland can mid-cycle redistrict?
I think that there is probably a legal question that could be presented. Unfortunately, because this is going on in so many other states across the country, as many of you know, I practice law for a living. And I tell my clients always this: if you can avoid it, don't push all your chips into the middle of the table and just wait for a judge to decide. Do the right thing in terms of how you can handle things before litigation. Don't just bet the farm on what the litigation outcome would be. So there's certainly an argument to be made, and that probably will be made, that we don't have the authority under the governor's proposal or potential proposal now to go back midway through the cycle and redistrict. This legislation will make that clear. There won't be any more question. If we pass this legislation, no one will be able to go and try doing it again and go to the Maryland Supreme Court and say, oh yeah, we have the right to do that, because they'll wave this around and say, nope, the Maryland General Assembly passed a bill that said that you can't do it. And so we think that it's a little bit of a gray area, and we should make it very clear, black and white, that this is a once every 10 year after the census process, as it has been for political generations before us.
Do you, in this process, Democrats have stuff that they could lose? I mean, they could lose
Sure.
a whole district or two. Do
Sure.
you have faith in the Supreme Court, which has Hogan appointees, Republican governor appointees, that it could actually swing in your favor?
I mean, it could. I would hesitate again to say this, and some of this is not based on my political experience, but my professional experience. Our state courts are not like the federal courts. We've gotten to the point where we look at the United States Supreme Court and we say, you're a Republican justice, you're a Democrat justice. That's not really how Maryland's appellate courts work. A lot of that is because of the necessity of we have to appoint people from districts, from regions onto the Court of Appeals, or the Supreme Court as it's now called. So, I do think that there really is a risk. Congressman Harris has talked about that. Others have talked about that. If the Maryland Supreme Court, if they come out with an 8-0 complete partisan gerrymandered map that has lines squiggling all over the state, and the sole reason is to make sure that no one from the Republican Party has a chance to get elected, there is a chance that the Maryland Supreme Court could say, we're going to throw that entire map out. We're going to redraw the map according to our own standards in a fair way. And I think if you really look at compact and contiguous communities in Maryland, in regions, Western Maryland, the Eastern Shore, Southern Maryland, a sort of beam of how people vote from Harford County through Northern Baltimore County over into Carroll County, it certainly would be fair and I think a reasonably drawn map for a court to decide we're going to create districts where, not because we as a court want Republicans to have these seats, but because we think it's fair to give them a chance, whereas political parties, we could win 2 or 3 seats. So that is a real risk. Senator Ferguson's made that very clear in his admonition to the governor. I don't think that the juice is worth the squeeze, so to speak, here, because we very well could lose a court case and we could actually wind up having less Democratic seats. That'd be fine with us. We think that would be fair, but that's a risk they're going to have to consider.
It sounds like what you're proposing is a version of what the Democrats in Congress have been proposing to Republicans for years, more than a decade now, fair redistricting, and holding a bipartisan commission to redistrict only on the decennial census. So I'm wondering, what they told me is Jamie Raskins actually proposed that, and Senator Van Hollen have been proponents of these measures, but Republicans have never taken them up on it. So I'm wondering if this kind of piggybacks on that. I will get to a question. What I'm wondering is do you have the same opposition to your GOP counterparts in state legislatures in Texas and Missouri as you do for the Maryland Democrats who are trying to take more seats for their own political advantage here?
I'll let Senator.
Let me take that. Well, first of all, I think the idea of a national standard is a good idea. And I think we probably all 4 of us, I think, agree that a national standard would be a good idea. But how you get there and what you do is important. The bill you're referencing, it's always brought up that, Democrats offered this in 2021. They offered a bill to completely federalize all elections and do a whole lot of other stuff. So I think, I just speaking for myself, sorry, I didn't mean to rub all 4 of you in. I think for myself, the idea of there being a nonpartisan commission requirement is not, for me just speaking personally, is not a bad thing for Congress to consider. Generally, what's come along with that is a whole lot of other things that have been in those bills that have to do with a lot of sort of left-wing touchstones, and I don't want to get way in the weeds. So I think, it depends on how it's offered, and we'd love for, I think, all of us, the United States Supreme Court at some point might get a chance to weigh in, which might be the way to get some more of an equal protection of rights type standard. And I am not an attorney, so I won't pretend that I know what that would look like exactly. So to answer your question, I think nobody is opposed to the idea of every state having a more independent redistricting process. The question of the specific bill, I'm not, there's a lot more to it than that. So, so that, I guess that's my answer to the question. Yeah.
Also, I'd like to just highlight a distinction. So we heard from Senate President Ferguson warning his colleagues that this could backfire on them. But that was a political warning. We're here today in good faith of trying to do what's right, not for political reasons. There's a distinction of why we think it's wrong to draw out the only Republican district in Maryland, because it's wrong. And that's why I started my speech with, we're not Texas, we're not Ohio, we're not Virginia, we're not these other states, we're in Maryland. And in Maryland, it's true that Democrats have the historical distinction of gerrymandering the hell out of our state for decades. That's a fact. We are one of the most gerrymandered states in the country, if not the most. As I highlighted earlier, it wasn't long ago that Republicans, despite having no more registrations, right, despite having no more advantage statewide, there were 4 and 4. There were 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats. And every decade, every census, the Democrats have managed to surgically remove a Republican congressman from representation. That's the fact. And they just did this 2 years ago. And the courts weighed in on that and said it was wrong. And so the fact that they are back again trying to do the exact same thing, draw that district across the Bay Bridge into Annapolis to remove Andy Harris because they don't like him, it's wrong. And we're not here, you could make the argument that we're here for political reasons. We're not. We're here trying to say we want a fair process. And I think that is what is in the best interest of Marylanders. And we should be more focused on what's going on in Maryland and less about what's going on around the country. There are so many issues, big ticket issues in Maryland. I'm shocked that the governor has time to focus on what's going on outside of Maryland. We got one of the largest tax increase in Maryland history was implemented months ago, and the hole we found out yesterday is just as big. We have another $1.4 billion hole that we have to fill. We got energy crisis. We got audits all over the place with this administration. By the way, those audits are not incorporated into that deficit. The $500 million that was fraudulently billed to the federal government, that wasn't included in that proposed deficit. So I am shocked, we're appalled that the governor, with all of the irons in the fire, all of the things that he has to deal with, has time to figure out how to disenfranchise millions of Marylanders. It's outrageous. And so what we've done today is put fairness above politics by introducing a bill that puts it in the hands of nonpartisan participants, representation from the Democrats, the Republicans, the independents, and do what's best for the people. That's what we're recommending. Otherwise, we should say, yeah, go ahead, gerrymander it, and then have the courts give us more seats. That's not what we're asking. We're taking the high road by putting in reasonable and meaningful and independent legislation to do what's right for Marylanders, based on the history of Maryland, and that's the distinction.
Based on that, looking at where things stand with the commission and the timeline for all of this and the possibility of a special session still looming, so I'm clear, are you guys prepared to sue over this map if it does come forward?
I think there definitely will be. I mean, I can tell you that you can't prepare a lawsuit until you know what the lay of the land looks like. But there are plenty of attorneys. There are the attorneys who handled the prior litigation, the case that struck the 8-0 map that was proposed in the 2021 special session. Those folks are still here. They still exist. There are plenty of other redistricting attorneys in Maryland, and of course, with our proximity to D.C., that's a subculture down there in the D.C. legal landscape. And so, I think that there's very little doubt that if the redistricting commission goes through and produces an 8-0 map that violates the type of principles that Judge Battaglia articulated back in 2021, that characterizes it simply as an extreme partisan gerrymander only for the purpose of benefiting one party versus creating sort of fair districts, there will be litigation. There will be lawsuits. They will be filed timely. As Senator Ferguson pointed out, will that mess up potential filing deadlines for all offices across the state? Might. Will that change our primary dates? It could. Will that cause more cost, more expense to the state and to the Board of Elections? Sure could. I think all of those points that he made are just grist for the mill to say that this is not the right time. I don't know how they're going to be able to do a special session, quite frankly, timing-wise. I was told yesterday by Mayor Morris, who's the mayor of the city in which I happen to live, that his understanding is they want to do 4 to 5 additional meetings of this commission that would be maybe on a once-a-week basis. They're not going to do anything during Thanksgiving week, obviously, for time constraint problems. That puts you into, December 7th, 10th, 15th. If Governor Moore and the Democratic leadership think that it's wise to spend our tax dollars to bring us all back here for a special session, I don't live in Annapolis. You got to put me up in a hotel room. You got to put Delegate Pippi up in a hotel room, all this kind of stuff. We don't live close enough to here to drive back and forth all day long. If you want to go to those costs and expense to have a special session the week before Christmas, when we're back in session on January the 14th, I think Maryland taxpayers will look negatively on that. So special session, the governor won't come out and say no, so that's why we're preparing for it. But I think more likely this may come to a head in early January.
The governor has.
Senator Reedy, so you mentioned earlier on that this bill would sort of be a vehicle for a national movement to sort of have fair districts drawn all across the country. And, if we think on this redistricting war, it started with President Trump essentially going to a bunch of states and telling them that, we need more seats in the House so that we can easily enact my agenda because the House is effectively 50-50 in Congress. And so am I correct in understanding that, this bill that you all are introducing in Maryland is effectively you all bucking the main Republican line of doing whatever they can at any cost to enact Trump's agenda?
Well, first of all, I didn't say that this is part of a national movement. I said, I don't, personally speaking for myself, I think exploring ways to have independent redistricting is a good idea. This is about Maryland. This is about making a fair process in Maryland. I would disagree with your assertion. I do understand the tick-tock of President Trump saying to Texas, hey, you should do this. Texas already had a lawsuit they were dealing with, and also Texas was dealing with census issues that were screwed up. I don't know what else to say. It was a huge screw-up in how the census data was interpreted when Texas did this before. I'm not going to get into whether it's good or bad. I don't know the Missouri situation. But quite frankly, what Texas has done, or any of these other states, Maryland, California, Illinois, New York already did worse existing map than anything that's happened in Texas, and I don't know much about Missouri's situation. I'm not saying we're up here saying that's good or bad. We're here at the state level talking about what Maryland should do, and Maryland should not squelch the 12% voice in our congressional delegation, the only minority party member in our congressional delegation. It's actually bad politics. We're talking about what's right. It's actually not smart politics because there's going to be Republican presidents and Republican Senate and House majorities. There will be Democratic Senate and House majorities and presidents in the future as well. So I can't really give advice to other states, but for Maryland, squelching the one voice we have out of 10 federal representatives is absolutely the wrong thing to do. And this bill is about trying to find a way to have a fair process moving forward.
You and the governor have both used the same word, fair, in terms of talking about redistricting, whether it's the current maps or a future map. The governor has not really elaborated on what he defines as fair or unfair, but I'll ask you sort of explicitly, are the current maps as drawn and approved in 2022 fair? And what does fair look like to the Republican caucus?
I would say no. I think legally, are the maps that exist today, probably able to withstand scrutiny? We're not sure because they weren't actually litigated after we made the change, after Judge Battaglia's decision that threw out the original map. But I would say as a Maryland citizen, as a Maryland voter, and I'll be honest with you, as someone who lives in Western Maryland, no, they're not fair today. Fair means that everybody has an open, even chance to participate. It means that the lines are not drawn based upon where politicians live or what politicians will get an advantage. It's drawn based upon the factors that we've talked about: communities of interest, contiguous counties, maintaining areas and regions of the state. So here's an interesting thing. We're members of the Maryland General Assembly. In the House of Delegates, we have what's called the Western Maryland Delegation. Do any of you know what counties are included in the Western Maryland Delegation as defined by the leadership of the House of Delegates? Carroll, Frederick, Washington, Allegheny, Garrett. That should be a congressional district, right? Matches up to 700 and some thousand people, the right number. We take Carroll out. Carroll's in the Western Maryland Delegation when they come here because their politics are different than Baltimore counties and Baltimore cities, and they don't want them lumped in to change those delegations. They lump them in with Western Maryland's delegation, but then take them out. That's not fair. So, fair is an objective word. It's like, or a subjective word, excuse me. It's like reasonable. You're going to see a lot of words fair and reasonable if you ever read court cases. They're in the eye of the beholder, but as all my colleagues have pointed out, Maryland's not a 7-1 Democrat, Republican-oriented state. It's certainly not an 8-0 state. We're not going to tell you that Maryland's a red state. We're not even going to tell you that it's a straight purple 50-50 state. We understand the realities that there are a majority of people who live in the I-95 corridor who identify as Democrats and vote democratically, and they deserve to have their votes counted, and they deserve to be the majority party. They show up and win the most of the elections. What they don't deserve to do is to take people from other regions of the state, Baltimore County, Harford County, northern Baltimore County in particular, Carroll County, western Maryland, the eastern shore. They don't deserve to take those people where they're not the majority party, where they don't represent all the voices of the voters, and rig the maps so that those people don't have any say. That's not fair.
Question about the budget. Looking at what we found out yesterday, you hinted at this a little bit about some cuts coming. Can you elaborate on what exactly we should expect to see from various proposals from you next session when it is time to address this growing deficit?
Right, well, I think one of the biggest issues we have to address is the blueprint. And again, we've been told for years and years that this is in the out years, beginning the FY28 budget. It's still very apparent from the presentation that we got yesterday, although that will be handled, the money that is being put aside specifically for that is going away in this budget. So one, and David Romans even suggested that we do address the out years with respect to the blueprint. So I think we need to finally get some decisions made with the blueprint on how we're going to do it. The implementation costs are what's coming forward now. We've agreed for throughout the years, when we opposed the budget, keep in mind, the blueprint, Governor Hogan vetoed it, that this was not the appropriate education reform system that we thought it was going to be. It is more apparent now as we see the results in classroom education, we see where achievements are, that this is not working for us. So I think there have to be major changes to that. We've always talked about the size of government, and what we've seen. Governor Moore came in his first, few days in office, and Brian spoke extensively on this, 10,000 new people he wants to hire. That was, if anything, was the selling point that Maryland was in a good fiscal state when he came into office, was the fact that he was willing to go out and hire 10,000 new people. If he thought that we were in a bad fiscal condition, you would never say, I need to hire more people. So he knew that we were in a good fiscal position. He wants to hire 10,000 more people. Yes, we had a presentation yesterday, again, talked about the number of people that are no longer working in government. Again, we think that whether it's through buyouts, through hiring freezes, through other things, you just have to right-size government here in Maryland. And finally, we've talked about the entitlement programs. The entitlements have, again, when you're in a good fiscal position, you're tending to expand those entitlement programs. We need to go back, scale that back. Maryland is one of the highest percentage states on Medicaid. Again, why is that the case? If we're one of the wealthiest states, unemployment's low, what are we doing wrong that has got us to be so high with respect to where we are with Medicaid? That has to be adjusted as well, too. So I think there are a number of things from just those few perspectives. But again, it's one of the things that will be very difficult to get across to Democrats, that you've got to cut government. They're going to look to raise taxes again. There's no doubt in my mind, election year or not, the Democrats are going to want to raise taxes. And we will be there to slow that down, prevent that. I think all of us, if anybody goes out, the biggest thing we hear about from our constituents right now is the cost of vehicle registrations. Every single person that we talk to comes out and says, I just went in to get my vehicle registered. It costs double what it does. And everybody's asking, where's that money going? Everybody asks, where's the money from sports gaming going? Where's the money from the lottery money going? All these things that Democrats have said year after year after year, these special, items or programs that we're putting in place to pay for these things, and now they're being told that there's not enough money to fund Blueprint. So we're going to, fight against that, obviously. We're going to make sure that we can come up with, once again, another budget that could be passed without having to raise taxes. We presented that on the Senate floor as an amendment last year. Had 5 Democrats vote for that budget with us. In fact, we had more votes for that budget than there were for the other budget. And so, we've again thought that was a very positive sign, and we'll continue to look at that as well as some other things to, again, not allow Governor Moore to raise taxes again.
Speaking with the budget, I think all of you at this point have said that Democrats need to stop blaming the federal government for its fiscal problems. Yesterday, say during the briefing, there was clear impact from the One Big Beautiful Bill, the way that the federal tax system has been reorganized, the way that programs like SNAP and Medicaid the fees are being raised on states rather than the federal government contributing what it has. Is there room for Maryland Republicans to point to the federal government and say, this is actually part of the problem?
I'll say, one of the interesting things was they talked about the SALT, right? How it went from $10,000 to $40,000. And Maryland Democrats looked at that as bad. That took away revenue from the state.
But they want it.
Right. We looked at it from perspective that helped individual taxpayers. You had a larger tax benefit as a result of that. So it's just a difference of appearance and how they would come back and say less revenue for the state of Maryland, to run all of their programs must be bad. But in the sense that when you talk and see what the, One Big Beautiful Bill did of increasing that, of lowering corporate tax rates. So that did things that we would always say, bring down the cost of government, benefit taxpayers, and help those businesses grow. So we saw those as very positives. The fact that the Democrats see less revenue coming into the state as bad, I think is just the fundamental difference on how they view government and how we view government.
The other thing, too, on that is it's like the tale of two states. The only comparable state kind of to Maryland's situation is Virginia. Why does Virginia have a $2+ billion surplus? Well, for one, Virginia, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, they support small business. Virginia has prioritized growing the private sector. Maryland has been negligent at best. Particularly under this administration. There's more than one way to get revenue in your state. It doesn't all have to come from the federal government. It could come from the private sector. And Republicans have, said it to their blue in the face that we need to do a better job at supporting our small businesses. We need to do a better job at recruiting businesses to come into Maryland. And we've done the opposite, quite frankly. The majority party has done the opposite. Most states surrounding Maryland all have surpluses. So conveniently, this administration has blamed every single woe they have on the Trump administration. Every single one. And maybe politically that works for them and the Democrat Party, but those aren't the facts. The fact of the matter is we've had lots of opportunities that were squandered to have a more robust economy, to hedge against a situation if the federal government reduces spending, just like Virginia. Virginia, they have Democrat-controlled House and Senate, but yet they have surpluses. How is that possible? They even have more federal workers than Maryland does. They have 40,000 more federal workers than they do. Their population's a little bit bigger, but nonetheless, they have figured out a way to prosper in spite of the fact that the federal government is reducing spending. So, it's disappointing that the governor has literally just thrown his hands up and said, I'm just gonna blame the Trump administration for all of our problems. When, and I'll use his word, most of these problems we have are self-inflicted. Self-inflicted. The spending issues we have, self-inflicted. The audit issues we're having, self-inflicted. The taxes and fees, and we've been adding them up. We have staff that literally spend all their day just adding up all the taxes and fees that are raised.
Takes all day.
We're in 400+ fees increase. It's a real problem. And there seems to be a significant lack of accountability with this administration. And we have real issues at Maryland. And I really hope that this administration takes some responsibility for the fiscal woes that we currently have, so that way we can move Maryland forward. So.
On the budget too, I've talked to some people, and it's varying opinions on whether tax increases will be the appetite given the election, but just like we've seen in previous years, the increase in various fees and targeted tax and fee increases is the language that's been used before to kind of get to where the budget needs to go from the Democrats' perspective. At this point, do you believe that Marylanders should expect to see more fee increases if blanket tax increases are not on the table?
I think that's probably, I sit on the committee that deals with all the taxes for the last decade plus. I don't think that there will be an appetite for the type of, we're going to raise a rate, so to speak, in income tax, sales tax, property tax. Everybody's going to see that and say, oh, you used to be 5%, now it's 5.25, whatever it is. I don't think that there will be the appetite for that because, frankly, what has all this process revealed? You can raise the rates of taxes and not really generate enough revenue to still pay for what you want to pay. At a certain point in time, it has a effect where you're chasing money away. Tobacco taxes are a great example of that. The more we raise the rate on tobacco taxes, the less revenue we actually get from tobacco taxes. I'm not a big fan of tobacco in general, so that's fine. Less people are smoking, that's good. But the tax situation has an effect. Targeted fees, sure. We talk, Jesse talked about, we have a fairly small staff of people who try to keep track of all these things. The Moore administration and the Democratic leadership has literally dozens and dozens and dozens of people who can find ways to be like, hey, we used to charge you $11.50 went to the state when you put, a certain thing into your house. When you got a home entertainment system, we had a fee. Now we can raise that to $13.50. You probably won't even notice, but when we add it up, it'll be another $2 million, and on and on and on and on and on. So targeted fee increases, I suspect, probably will be part of the original budget. And if they're not part of the original budget, I think Democrats here in Annapolis will try to find ways to jam them in there. And you really have to look at them fee by fee. There are some things that maybe make a little bit of sense. There are a lot of things that were done over the last year or two that don't make sense. Increasing the vehicle registration fees, doubling them, adding new fees to almost everything you do. Every time you walk into a government office, you better bring your credit card because nothing's for free anymore and nothing's cheap. And we talk a lot about how we want to lift up the least among us, and we want to provide barriers or eliminate barriers for those who live in poverty in Maryland. I don't know how in the heck they can access most of the services and the government opportunities that exist because we charge you for everything out the wazoo. So that's definitely going to be on the table.
On redistricting, one more. This commission, when they met, talked about getting a temperature from Marylanders on if they even want to go forward with this process. Do you feel this commission is giving a fair listen to what Marylanders want?
I think the first meeting is 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon. It doesn't appear as though they're really concerned about what Marylanders have to say. The fact they talked about this in the organizational meetings, they weren't even sure how they were going to handle these meetings, whether or not they were going to be in person, whether it was going to be virtual. Senate President brought up, do they have to be in every congressional district? That was something that they did with the, what they call, LRAC?
LRAC.
That's what they did with that. They had to go in each congressional district and have a public hearing there as well, too. Senator Alston-Brooks was not able to answer any of those questions. It was far from organizational. And she simply said, our next meeting will be Friday at 4 o'clock. Not even mentioning truly that this was going to be a meeting that they were going to look for public input. Now, public input on what? Whether or not you want to see redistricting or not? I mean, maybe the governor should have his own commission on whether or not Marylanders want to see taxes go higher. Just go out and ask people, hey, do you want higher taxes or not? No, nothing to say, well, this is what would happen if you did it, this would happen if you didn't. Nothing like that. This is simply going to be, they want to be able to go out and have people say, we want fair maps, or we want 8-0. And that's what they're going to get from their Democrat supporters. And at the same time, I think you'll hear from Marylanders, a lot of what we just said, there is an importance of having a Republican representative in Congress, especially when there's a Republican governor. And I'll go back to another example that Justin and I sit on the committee that deals with health care. Health care has dramatically changed under the Trump administration with respect to where Medicaid funding is. Maryland has a very unique all-payer system that now has moved to a HEAD program. When we've been in meetings, we've had Democrat leadership say, hey, will you Republicans go talk to your Republican representative in Congress and see if he can help us out on this? They utilized us for that. Hey, they recognize it was important that Andy Harris is sitting in Congress on appropriations as a medical doctor that might be able to bring back information or help Maryland with what the Trump administration did with respect to Medicaid.
And he has, by the way. So
Yes, and so just as important too, we've heard a lot about the Key Bridge. Where they keep going back, can you talk to Congressman Harris helping us on this side? So, that's what's very contradictory about what Governor Moore wants to do in eliminating the Republicans in Congress. He wants to eliminate it because that's a political movement that he's been told by Speaker Jeffries and Senate.
Not Speaker yet.
I'm sorry, by Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer. Governor Moore has been told this is what you will do, and he's falling in line doing that. Governor Moore loves to say about Trump, President Trump, I bow to no one. I will not do that. But as soon as Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer tells him what to do with respect to redistricting, he's doing that. And that's because Gavin Newsom's doing that in California. And so he has to keep in line with that. So it's very contradictory that he wants to say should have no Republican representation, yet at the same time utilize Congressman Harris and a number of us when he needs something out of the federal government.
Senator Hershey and Delegate Buckle, I want to test that statement about the benefit of having a Republican in Congress during a Republican administration. Western Maryland suffered from a number of floods earlier this year. They've been denied FEMA aid. Andy Harrison, in an interview with me, said that that the federal government shouldn't step up, that the state of Maryland should step up and pick up the full $33 million. How did having a Republican in Congress benefit the people of Western Maryland at a time when they had the most need?
You know, the beauty of the political system, so it's not sports. I root for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steve over here, we're not sure. We don't want to say who he roots for. But what I will suggest to you is it's not sports. We're allowed to have civil and rational disagreements between ourselves, even though we wear the same jersey, so to speak. I disagree with Congressman Harris about the allocation of FEMA funds to Western Maryland. I've seen it up close. It's 10, 15 minutes from my house. I know that they probably should have gotten those FEMA funds. I don't know why they didn't get them. It's fair to draw whatever inferences you want.
Could he have done more to get it for the state of Maryland?
I think that, obviously he could have made it a higher priority for him. He doesn't represent Western Maryland, I understand that, but he could have said, hey, I'm going to make this the highest priority I can. But I'll tell you this, Ronald Reagan said this once, if someone is my friend or agrees with me 80% of the time, he's on my team. So what we've gotten to in today's politics is unless you're on the team 100% of the time, you're an enemy. And so I think that your point that, Congressman Harris wasn't able to get the FEMA funding for Western Maryland, he wasn't. And maybe he didn't prioritize that. I would have maybe done that differently. Doesn't mean I don't agree the things that he can do for Maryland in the appropriations process, the things he can do for his own district, the Eastern Shore, Harford County, those areas in the process. And what I would suggest to you is, there's an inference that is created as the reason why Maryland or Western Maryland didn't get the FEMA money is because we're identified in the Trump White House as a super left-wing, partisan, hate the Trump administration state. That's not the people of Georges Creek. I can guarantee you that. Someone should have been able to explain that to whoever made that FEMA decision. That's not what we're talking about here. States are different. We don't look like Baltimore City. Howard County doesn't look like Queen Anne's County. It's not all the same. But at the end of the day, I think the point rings true, Brian. If you have only one party that has any influence whatsoever in this hyper-politicized environment we've gotten ourselves into in D.C., if you're not the party in power, you don't have much to say. I can tell you this, I don't think Chris Van Hollen and Angela Alsobrooks could get us any FEMA money either. I think they had about zero influence in getting FEMA money. I think April McLean Delaney, who represents the region, my region, I think she had zero influence in getting FEMA money. Why? Because they are partisan folks from the party that's out of power there, and they have no ability to work together to transact the people's business. That's a shame, but that's the reality.
But to my ear, it sounds like there's a conflict in the arguments that you're making, which is, first argument is that having a Republican in Congress benefits the state of Maryland, benefits the Republicans in the state of Maryland by having some representation.
I think it benefits the whole state.
But then there's a caveat there that there's an out because the congressman in question, who's a Republican, who's maybe supposed to represent those Republican voices, now has an out because he doesn't represent Western Maryland.
I'm not saying he has an out because of that. I'm saying he has an out because he has a disagreement. We disagree. Andy Harris came to the conclusion that he believed that FEMA should be cut back. Now, I don't know if he's going to apply that if a tornado hits Ocean City tomorrow. I'm not sure what his position will be on that. We'll see. I hope nothing like that ever happens. But he took a position of, hey, we're cutting back some of FEMA's role as sort of the global national insurer of last resort when you have natural disasters, and we're looking for states to fill in some of those gaps. I would disagree with that when it applies to what happened in my part of the state. That does not mean that overall, on balance, having a more balanced congressional delegation does not enable you to have a bigger voice in Washington, D.C. I guarantee you this, when Democrats are in complete control of Washington, D.C., South Dakota and Wyoming don't have much of a voice there because they only have all Republicans, and they're not people who probably have an invitation to the White House or to the back room when the decisions get made. Does Maryland want to be the same way? Because Steve said it exactly, and Justin has too. our nation is so divided, we go back and forth. You know, anybody that thinks that we're in an era of Republican hegemony, that you're only going to have Republicans in the White House and in Congress for the next 20 years is crazy. Just like all the Democrats who thought that with the emerging Democratic majority nonsense of the Barack Obama years, that didn't last very long. It's better to reflect the country, and the country is balanced. The country has different voices, different perspectives. I think it would be better for us overall to have both of those in our state delegation.